Eliana Richardson was 38 years old when she first admitted to herself that something was deeply wrong with her life. On the surface, she had everything most people dreamed of: wealth, status, security, and influence. She lived in a gated residential district of a major Western capital, in a house so large that silence echoed through its corridors. Her husband, Mark Richardson, was a powerful political consultant whose connections reached deep into government institutions and corporate circles. Their family name opened doors that remained permanently closed to others. Yet inside that beautiful prison, Eliana felt an emptiness that no amount of comfort could fill. She had been raised in a completely secular environment. Religion in her childhood was treated as an outdated tradition, something people once needed before science, psychology, and modern freedom replaced it. God was spoken of as an abstract idea, not a living reality. Faith was considered a private illusion, and morality was defined by social consensus rather than divine guidance. Eliana accepted these ideas without question for most of her life. Marriage, she believed, would bring fulfillment. Children, she hoped, would give her purpose. Success, she assumed, would eventually silence the quiet anxiety that followed her everywhere. None of it did. She and Mark had 4 children, each born into privilege, surrounded by the best education, technology, and opportunities money could buy. But as the children grew, Eliana noticed something unsettling. They were restless, easily angry, emotionally fragile. Her eldest son struggled with aggression. Her daughter suffered from anxiety at an age when children should have felt safe and carefree. The younger ones asked questions Eliana could not answer. What is the point of being good if nothing really matters? Why should we care about right or wrong? What happens when people die? These questions haunted Eliana because they reflected her own unspoken fears. Her marriage offered no refuge. Mark was emotionally distant, increasingly controlling, and obsessed with public image. To him, family was an extension of reputation. Any deviation from normality was a threat. Conversations between them became cold and transactional. When Eliana expressed emotional exhaustion, Mark dismissed it as weakness. People like us don't have the luxury of confusion, he once told her. Stability is all that matters. But stability without meaning felt like slow suffocation. Late at night, when the house was silent and her children slept, Eliana would sit alone staring at the ceiling, overwhelmed by a sense that life was slipping through her fingers without purpose. She felt guilty for her dissatisfaction. After all, what right did she have to complain? Yet, the emptiness only deepened. The breaking point came during a health scare. Persistent chest pain sent her through weeks of medical tests. Though doctors later ruled out any serious illness, the fear she felt during that period changed her permanently. For the first time, she confronted her own mortality. What if I die? She wondered. What if there is nothing after this? And if there is something, am I prepared? She tried meditation, therapy, self-help philosophies. None of them answered the question burning inside her. Why do I exist? It was during this fragile period that fate, or something greater, placed her on a path she never imagined. A path that would expose her to injustice, cruelty, and oppression. But also to truth, patience, and the unseen help of Allah. At that moment, Eliana did not know her life was about to change forever. She only knew one thing with certainty. The world she trusted had failed to give her peace, and her search had only just begun. Eliana's life continued outwardly unchanged after the health scare, but something inside her had shifted. She became more observant, more sensitive to the cracks beneath the polished surface of her world. The way Mark spoke to her, with authority rather than partnership, the way decisions about the children were made without her voice, the way freedom seemed to exist only for those who controlled the rules. The first real confrontation came during a school incident. Her eldest son had been involved in a fight. When Eliana went to the private institution to understand what happened, she discovered that the administration had already sided with another family, one with stronger political ties. Her son's explanation was dismissed. No investigation, no balance. Just a quiet suggestion that it would be better for everyone if Eliana did not pursue the matter further. That was when she realized something unsettling. Power decided truth. When she raised the issue at home, Mark's reaction was cold and sharp. "You're embarrassing us," he said. "This is how things work. Learn to accept it." "But our son," she began. "Our son will learn discipline," Mark interrupted, and you will stop asking questions. It was the first time Eliana truly felt fear of her own husband. Not physical fear, but the fear of being erased. Around the same time, Eliana began volunteering at a community outreach program, partly to escape the suffocating silence of her home. The program supported displaced families and single mothers, many of them immigrants. It was there that she met Samira Khalid. Samira was nothing like the women Eliana usually encountered. She wore modest clothing, spoke gently, and carried herself with quiet dignity. Despite living a life far more difficult than Eliana's, Samira radiated calm. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, her words carried weight. One afternoon, as they sorted donated supplies together, Eliana finally asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. "How are you so steady?" Eliana said. "With everything you've been through." Samira smiled softly. "Because I know Allah sees everything," she replied, "and no injustice lasts forever." The word Allah unsettled Eliana, not with fear but with curiosity. Samira did not preach. She did not argue. She simply lived with a certainty Eliana had never seen before. Over time, small conversations unfolded, about patience, about trials, about trust in a higher justice beyond human systems. One day, Eliana asked, "What gives you the right to believe God cares about you personally?" Samira answered without hesitation, "Because he created me, and he promised that oppression will never be ignored." That sentence struck Eliana deeply. At home, the atmosphere worsened. Mark grew increasingly controlling, monitoring her activities, questioning her associations. When he discovered her volunteering involved Muslim families, his tone hardened. "Be careful who you associate with," he warned. "People like that bring trouble." For the first time, Eliana saw how easily prejudice hid behind sophistication. The pressure intensified when Mark began dictating how the children should think, behave, and speak. Emotional control replaced dialogue. Authority replaced compassion. Eliana noticed how fear was becoming the tool of order inside her own household. Late one night, after another argument, she locked herself in the bathroom and cried silently, afraid even of her own thoughts. She felt trapped, by marriage, by status, by expectations. That night, a question formed clearly in her heart. If this is freedom, why does it feel like oppression? The next day, Samira noticed Eliana's exhaustion. "You look burdened," she said gently. Eliana hesitated, then whispered, "What do you do when the world is unfair and you have no power?" Samira looked at her with compassion. "You turn to the one who has all power." A few days later, Samira placed a small book into Eliana's hands. "It's a translation of the Quran," she said. "Read it when you're ready, no pressure." Eliana took it home, hiding it among her belongings like something forbidden. That night, after everyone slept, she opened it with trembling hands. She did not yet know it, but this book, these words, would become her refuge during the darkest oppression she had yet to face. And Allah's help, though unseen, had already begun. Eliana did not read the Quran immediately. For several days, the book remained hidden at the bottom of her bedside drawer, wrapped in a scarf as if it were something fragile. She was afraid, not of the text itself, but of what it might awaken inside her. For years, she had been taught that religion divided people, that faith weakened reason. Yet something about Samira's calm certainty had unsettled those assumptions. One night, after a particularly tense dinner where Mark criticized the children harshly for minor mistakes, Eliana retreated to her room with a pounding heart. She could still hear his voice echoing in her mind. Firm, absolute, unquestionable. She felt small, powerless, and unseen. It was then that she reached for the book. She opened it randomly, without ceremony, without expectation. Her eyes fell on words that seemed to speak directly to her condition. Allah does not wrong people at all, but it is people who wrong themselves. She froze. The sentence struck her with a force she could not explain. It was neither poetic nor emotional in the way motivational texts were. It was firm, clear, uncompromising, yet strangely comforting. It suggested a universe governed by justice, not chaos. A God who is not indifferent, not distant. She read on. Page after page, Eliana encountered ideas that challenged everything she thought she knew about faith. This God was not portrayed as tribal or exclusive, but as the creator of all humanity. He was described as all-seeing, all-knowing, aware of what hearts concealed. He knew oppression. He heard silent prayers. He promised accountability not just for the weak, but especially for the powerful. That night, Eliana barely slept. Over the following weeks, reading the Quran became her secret refuge. She read slowly, carefully, often stopping to reflect. Some verses frightened her with their honesty. Others brought unexpected peace. Again and again she encountered a recurring theme. Life as a test, hardship as a means of purification, patience as strength rather than weakness. One verse stayed with her constantly. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. She whispered the words to herself during moments of anxiety, repeating them like an anchor. For the first time, suffering was not meaningless. It was acknowledged, named, and given purpose. Meanwhile, the pressure at home intensified. Mark noticed the change in her. She was quieter, more composed, less reactive to his anger. This disturbed him more than open resistance ever could. "You're hiding something," he accused one evening. "I'm just tired," Eliana replied calmly. He did not believe her. Soon, control turned into intimidation. He monitored her phone, questioned her movements, dismissed her thoughts in front of the children. Once, during an argument, he slammed his hand against the table so hard the younger children flinched. Eliana felt something break inside her, not fear, but resolve. That night, as her children slept, she sat on the floor with the Quran open in her lap and whispered words she had never spoken before. "God, if you are real," she said quietly, "then see me. I don't know how to pray. I don't know what you want from me, but I can't live like this anymore." There was no thunder, no vision, no voice. But there was stillness. A deep, steady calm settled over her heart, unlike anything she had ever experienced. For the first time in years, her thoughts slowed. The fear loosened its grip. She felt seen. The next day, she asked Samira questions. Many questions. About belief, about prayer, about women in Islam, about oppression and justice. Samira answered patiently, often saying, "If you don't understand something, seek knowledge. Islam never asks you to turn off your mind." That sentence mattered to Eliana. Slowly, quietly, without announcements or declarations, her worldview began to change. She was not yet Muslim. She had not taken any formal step. But the seed had been planted. And as the Quran taught her, seeds grow in darkness, long before they ever break the surface. She did not yet realize that greater dhulm, oppression, awaited her. But she was no longer walking alone. Allah had already begun to guide her. Eliana's inner transformation did not go unnoticed. Change, especially quiet change, often unsettles those who depend on control. Mark sensed that something fundamental was shifting, and it disturbed him deeply. She no longer argued the way she used to. She listened more, she reacted less. His sharp words no longer provoked tears or panic. Instead, she responded with calm restraint, and that calm felt like defiance. "What are you reading these days?" he asked one evening, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. "Nothing important," Eliana replied truthfully, but not completely. Suspicion crept into their home like a slow poison. Mark began arriving unexpectedly, checking rooms, questioning the children, asking staff about Eliana's routines. The house, once merely cold, became tense. Every movement felt observed. Every silence felt dangerous. Eliana, meanwhile, continued reading the Quran in secret. She learned about prophets who stood against injustice, about Moses confronting tyranny, about Abraham breaking false idols, about people who chose truth even when it isolated them. These stories no longer felt distant or symbolic. They felt painfully real. One verse in particular settled into her heart. "And do not incline toward those who do wrong, lest the fire touch you." For the first time, Eliana recognized oppression not only as physical violence, but as emotional domination, silencing, manipulation. She realized that remaining silent in the face of injustice was also a form of surrender. Her relationship with Samira deepened. During short conversations, Samira explained that Islam did not ignore suffering or excuse abuse. She spoke of accountability, of boundaries, of dignity given by Allah to every human being, especially to women who had been historically wronged. "Eliana," Samira said one day, "Islam does not teach you to accept oppression. It teaches you to stand with truth even when standing is painful." Those words echoed loudly. The breaking point came during a family gathering. Mark, irritated by Eliana's refusal to drink alcohol and her quieter demeanor, mocked her in front of others. He implied she was becoming unstable, influenced by foreign ideas, embarrassing him socially. Laughter followed. Eliana sat frozen, humiliation burning through her chest. That night, when the house finally slept, Eliana closed herself in her room and cried, not from weakness, but from clarity. She knelt on the floor, holding the Quran tightly, and for the first time spoke directly and intentionally. Allah, if this is your truth, then give me strength. I am afraid, but I don't want to live in falsehood anymore. In that moment, something inside her settled. The fear did not disappear, but it no longer controlled her. Within weeks, Mark's behavior escalated. Emotional pressure turned into threats. He warned her that her beliefs could cost her custody of the children. He spoke of legal consequences, of institutions that would side with him. He reminded her, repeatedly, of his influence. "You think faith will protect you," he sneered once. "The world doesn't work that way." Eliana did not answer, but inside she remembered another verse. "And whoever puts his trust in Allah, he is sufficient for him." Still, the Vom was real. She was isolated from friends. Her access to finances was restricted. She was watched constantly. Yet even as the walls closed in, her heart felt strangely lighter. For the first time in her life, she knew where she stood. After months of struggle, Eliana reached a quiet but firm conclusion. Truth could not be lived halfway. Faith could not remain hidden forever. Not if it was real. One early morning, before the world awoke, she stood alone, facing the window where the first light of dawn appeared. With a trembling voice, she said the words Samira had taught her. Slowly, carefully, with full awareness. "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." Tears streamed down her face, not from fear but relief. She had crossed the line. There was no turning back. What she did not yet know was that the greatest Azmaish was still ahead. But so was the greatest madad from Allah. Eliana, now quietly calling herself Aisha in her heart, understood that accepting Islam was not the end of her struggle. It was the beginning of a far more difficult chapter. The peace she felt during prayer was real, but the world around her grew harsher with every passing day. Faith had given her clarity, and clarity had made her dangerous to those who thrived on control. She practiced Islam in secrecy at first. She learned how to pray through whispered guidance from Samira and late-night study. She performed her prayers silently behind locked doors, often with fear pounding in her chest. Yet even in fear, she felt dignity, something she had never truly possessed before. But secrecy has limits, especially inside a household built on surveillance and dominance. Mark noticed changes he could not explain. Aisha woke earlier. She avoided alcohol completely. She dressed more modestly, not dramatically, but deliberately. Her reactions to conflict were measured, no longer emotional. He interpreted her composure as rebellion. "You think you're better than us now?" he snapped one evening. "I think everyone deserves respect," she replied calmly. That answer infuriated him. The pressure soon turned into open hostility. Mark accused her of poisoning the children with foreign beliefs. He interrogated them, demanded explanations for their behavior, and punished them for answers he disliked. Aisha watched helplessly as fear entered their young faces. The children did not fully understand what was happening, but they felt the tension, the instability, the threat. That was when Aisha realized something critical. Her faith was no longer just about her. It was about protecting her children. She began teaching them quietly. Not theology, not rituals, but values rooted in Islam. She taught them kindness instead of anger, truth instead of fear, accountability instead of blind obedience. She spoke of one God who saw everything, including injustice inside homes, not just in streets and courts. "Allah is fair," she told them softly, "even when people are not." Mark's reaction was swift and cruel. He restricted her access to the children. He threatened legal action, claiming she was mentally unstable. He warned her that courts would side with him, not with a woman who had lost her sense. One night, during a heated argument, he slammed the door so hard it cracked the frame. The youngest child screamed. Aisha stood frozen, her heart racing, but her voice steady. "Stop," she said. "You will not frighten them anymore." Mark stared at her in disbelief. That was the moment he understood he was losing control. The following weeks were a blur of intimidation. Lawyers' names were mentioned. Child services were threatened. Mark's allies began appearing unexpectedly, offering advice, applying pressure, hinting at consequences. Aisha was isolated deliberately, cut off from support systems. Yet every night she turned to Allah. She cried in prayer, she begged, she asked for protection, for guidance, for strength she did not believe she possessed. And each time she returned from prayer steadier than before. One verse became her anchor. Allah is gentle with his servants. Gentle, but not absent. Samira helped her connect with a small network of Muslim women who had survived similar oppression. Their stories did not promise easy victories, but they carried hope. They reminded her that Allah's help often arrived quietly, through patience, timing, and resilience. The dhulm intensified when Mark formally filed a petition claiming Aisha was a danger to her children's mental well-being due to religious extremism. It was a calculated move, designed to strip her of credibility and custody. Aisha felt the weight of injustice crush her chest, but she refused to renounce her faith. "If this path costs me comfort," she whispered one night, "then let it cost me comfort. But do not take my faith." She did not yet know how Allah would help her. She did not know when relief would come. All she knew was this: she had chosen truth. And even under fire, truth does not burn. The situation crossed a dangerous line when oppression stopped being personal and became institutional. One morning, Aisha received a formal notice informing her that an official investigation had been opened into her capacity as a mother. The language was cold, legal, and deliberately humiliating. It framed her faith not as belief, but as instability. Not as conscience, but as danger. Mark did not hide his satisfaction. "I warned you," he said flatly. "You chose this." Aisha felt the ground shift beneath her feet. For the first time since accepting Islam, fear wrapped around her heart. Not for herself, but for her children. The idea of losing them, of being erased from their lives by paperwork and power, felt unbearable. Social services began visiting the house. Interviews were conducted. Questions were asked in ways designed to provoke doubt. Her parenting was dissected. Her emotional state scrutinized. Her faith subtly framed as extremism. Each visit left her drained, trembling but resolute. She noticed something disturbing. No one asked about Mark's behavior. His anger, his threats, his intimidation. Power had already chosen its side. One evening, after a particularly aggressive interview, Mark stood in the doorway and said quietly, "If you renounce this religion publicly, all of this stops." Aisha looked at him, exhaustion heavy in her eyes. "And if I don't? Then I will make sure you never see the children again." That night, Aisha locked herself in the bathroom, sank to the floor, and broke down completely. For the first time in months, she felt close to collapse. The weight of injustice, fear, and loneliness crushed her chest. "Ya Allah," she whispered through tears. "I am weak. I cannot fight this alone. If you do not help me, I will lose everything." She stayed there for a long time, crying until her voice was gone. And then, slowly, something shifted. Not in the world, inside her. She remembered the words she had read so many times, "And never think that Allah is unaware of what the wrongdoers do." Oppression, she realized, did not mean abandonment. It meant testing. The next days brought further escalation. A court hearing was scheduled. Temporary custody arrangements were discussed. Lawyers spoke in coded threats. Mark's influence moved silently through systems designed to appear neutral. Aisha's children were questioned separately, confused, pressured, asked whether their mother frightened them, whether she forced beliefs on them, whether they felt unsafe. When her youngest child later asked, "Mama, did you do something bad?" Aisha's heart shattered. "No," she said softly, holding them close. "I chose to be honest." At night, when fear returned like a tide, she prayed, not with eloquent words, but with broken sincerity. Sometimes she had no words at all, only tears and trust. Samira stayed close, reminding her gently, "Allah's help often comes when every human door closes." Then, unexpectedly, help arrived from an unlikely place. A caseworker, quiet, observant, began asking different questions. She noticed inconsistencies. She noticed fear in the children's responses when Mark was present. She noticed Aisha's composure, her restraint, her refusal to retaliate. Small observations, small cracks. Meanwhile, a lawyer recommended by the Muslim community agreed to take Aisha's case, not for money but for justice. He listened, really listened. He documented Mark's threats, his patterns, his misuse of power. For the first time, Aisha felt she was not invisible. Still, the struggle was far from over. Court dates loomed. Custody remained uncertain. Pressure intensified. But something had changed. Aisha was no longer praying for escape. She was praying for strength. And in the heart of oppression, Allah was already arranging her rescue, piece by piece, unseen, unstoppable. The court hearing arrived sooner than Aisha expected. The building itself felt cold and unforgiving. Polished floors, high ceilings, and faces trained to show nothing. This was not a place of mercy. It was a place of procedure. Aisha sat quietly beside her lawyer, hands folded, heart pounding, whispering silent prayers with every breath. Mark arrived confident, composed, surrounded by advisors. He did not look at her. The case was presented as if it were simple and obvious. A concerned father, a confused mother, a risk to emotional stability. Words were chosen carefully, stripped of context, emptied of truth. Aisha listened as her faith was described as obsession, as influence, as danger. No one mentioned the shouting. No one mentioned the threats. No one mentioned the fear inside the home. When Aisha was allowed to speak, her voice was calm but firm. "I have not harmed my children," she said. "I have taught them kindness, honesty, and responsibility. I have taught them that injustice is wrong, even inside a home." Her words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. The judge did not respond. By the end of the session, a temporary ruling was issued. The words fell like a blade. The children were to be placed under temporary state supervision, separated from both parents until further evaluation. Aisha felt the world collapse. She did not scream. She did not argue. She simply closed her eyes as the weight of loss crushed her chest. When she was allowed to see her children briefly before they were taken, she knelt in front of them, holding their small hands, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Listen to me," she whispered. "No matter what happens, Allah sees you. Allah protects you, and I love you more than my life." The youngest child clung to her, crying. The others stood frozen, confused, afraid. When officials gently pulled them away, Aisha felt something tear inside her that would never fully heal. That night, alone in her empty house, Aisha experienced the darkest moment of her journey. The silence was unbearable. Every room echoed with absence. Toys untouched. Beds unmade. The air felt heavy with grief. She collapsed onto the floor and cried until there were no tears left. "I have nothing now," she whispered. "Ya Allah, I have nothing." And then she remembered. She remembered Prophet Yusuf, taken from his father unjustly. She remembered Musa's mother, forced to release her child into the river. She remembered that loss did not mean defeat. She stood slowly, washed her face, and prayed. Not for her children to be returned immediately, but for her heart to remain firm. In the days that followed, the oppression deepened. Media whispers began circulating. Friends distanced themselves. Invitations stopped. Her name became a quiet warning. Aisha was advised to compromise, to soften her position, to publicly distance herself from Islam. "If you just say it was a phase," one advisor suggested, "this can all go away." She refused. "I will not trade truth for comfort," she said quietly. That refusal came at a cost. Her finances were frozen. Her access to legal resources narrowed. She was moved into a small apartment provided by a community shelter. The woman who once lived in luxury now slept on a thin mattress with borrowed blankets. And yet, something extraordinary happened. In that small space, stripped of status, stripped of power, stripped of illusion, Aisha felt closer to Allah than she ever had before. She prayed in the quiet of dawn. She fasted with intention. She spoke to Allah as the only one who could hear her now. One night, exhausted and broken, she opened the Quran and read, "So do not weaken and do not grieve, and you will be superior if you are believers." For the first time since her children were taken, Aisha felt hope. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. The world believed she had lost everything. But Allah was preparing to give her back more than she ever imagined, in a way no court, no power, and no dhulm could stop. Life in the small apartment was a shock to Aisha's senses. Gone were the wide halls, the controlled silence, the constant pressure of image and expectation. Here, the walls were thin, the furniture mismatched, and the nights unbearably quiet. Yet in that quiet, something unexpected grew. Clarity. For the first time in her life, Aisha was alone without being lonely. She structured her days around prayer. Fajr before dawn, whispered and tearful. Duhr and Asr breaking the long hours of waiting. Maghrib as the sun disappeared behind concrete buildings instead of manicured gardens. Isha before sleep, when exhaustion finally forced her body to rest. Each prayer felt like a lifeline thrown across deep water. She still did not know where her children were being held, only that they were safe and under supervision. That uncertainty was a wound that never closed. Some nights she woke gasping, imagining them crying, calling for her. She would sit upright, hands trembling, and repeat again and again, Hasbi Allahu la ilaha illa huwa. Allah is sufficient for me. Meanwhile, unseen changes were taking place. The lawyer working on her case uncovered documents Mark had never expected anyone to find. Emails, recorded statements, patterns of behavior that revealed manipulation and coercion. Witnesses slowly came forward. A former employee, a neighbor, even a school counselor who had noticed fear-based responses in the children long before the investigation began. Each small discovery felt insignificant on its own. Together, they formed a picture the court could not ignore. Aisha was not told everything immediately. Her lawyer was careful, reminding her that justice moves slowly. But one afternoon, he arrived with a rare smile. "Things are shifting," he said. "Stay patient." At the same time, the caseworker who had first shown concern submitted an independent report. It spoke of emotional intimidation, imbalance of power, and the children's clear emotional attachment to their mother. It noted Aisha's calm demeanor under pressure and her consistent prioritization of her children's well-being. For the first time, the system hesitated. Mark, sensing the shift, grew desperate. He attempted to negotiate privately, offering compromises, then threats, then silence. Aisha refused all contact. She had learned a crucial lesson. When Allah takes over, human manipulation loses its grip. The Muslim community around her became her family. Women she barely knew brought meals. Others sat with her in silence when words failed. They reminded her that many before her had walked this road, and that Allah never abandoned those who trusted him. One elderly woman said softly, "My sister, Allah sometimes removes everything so that you see who was never meant to stay." Those words stayed with her. Then came the call. Aisha's hands shook as she held the phone. The voice on the other end spoke carefully, professionally, but the message was unmistakable. A review hearing had been scheduled. New evidence would be considered. The children's placement was being reevaluated. Aisha sank to the floor in sujud, sobbing, not from certainty, but from gratitude. "Ya Allah," she whispered, "even if you test me again, I know now that you see me." The hearing itself was brief compared to the first. The tone was different, less accusatory, more cautious. Questions were asked, real questions this time. Contradictions surfaced. Authority no longer sounded absolute. When Aisha was asked to speak, she did not defend herself aggressively. She spoke with quiet strength. "I want my children to grow up knowing justice, mercy, and accountability," she said. "I want them to know that power does not make someone right, and that faith is not a crime." Silence followed. The decision was not announced that day, but as Aisha left the building, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Relief, not because the battle was over, but because she knew now, without doubt, that Allah's help had arrived. Not with thunder, not with miracles that broke the sky, but with truth, patience, and timing, the kind of help that cannot be stopped. And soon, very soon, the world would see what Allah does to Dhulm when patience refuses to break. The days leading up to the final ruling felt longer than any Aisha had ever lived. Every hour stretched under the weight of uncertainty. She tried to keep herself steady, praying, reading Quran, helping at the community center, but her heart lived elsewhere, counting the distance between her and her children. The courtroom felt different this time. There was no rush, no arrogance in the air. The judge reviewed documents slowly. Questions were asked with precision, not assumption. Evidence that had once been ignored was now placed at the center of the discussion. Records of intimidation, expert evaluations of the children's emotional responses. testimonies that confirmed patterns of control rather than care. Mark sat rigid, his confidence cracked. His words sounded rehearsed, defensive. The authority he once wielded effortlessly now felt forced. When Aisha was called to speak, she stood with a calm that surprised even herself. She did not attack. She did not accuse. She spoke only truth. I did not choose faith to rebel, she said. I chose it to survive. I chose it because it taught me justice, responsibility, and mercy. I chose it because it taught me that oppression, no matter who commits it, is wrong. She paused, then added quietly, and I chose it because my children deserve to grow up without fear. The room was silent. This time, the judge listened. The ruling came later that afternoon. The children were to be returned to Aisha under full custody, with supervised visitation granted to Mark pending further evaluation. The investigation into her parenting was formally dismissed. The allegations tied to her faith were declared irrelevant. For a moment, Aisha could not breathe. When the words finally reached her heart, she lowered her head and whispered, Alhamdulillah. The reunion happened that same evening. The door opened and the children stood there, older, thinner, quieter, but unmistakably hers. The youngest ran forward first, crashing into her arms. The others followed, clinging to her as if afraid she might disappear again. Aisha held them all, crying openly, not caring who saw. Years of restraint shattered in that moment. She pressed her face into their hair, breathing them in, grounding herself in the reality she had prayed for every single night. We're home, she whispered. Allah brought you home. That night, in the small apartment, they prayed together for the first time since being separated. There were no long recitations, no formal speeches, only gratitude. The children spoke softly, thanking Allah for safety, for their mother, for being together again. Aisha watched them with a heart full of awe. This was not victory in the worldly sense. She had lost wealth, status, comfort, reputation. Her life would never return to what it was. But she had gained something far greater. She had gained truth without fear, faith without apology, motherhood without chains. In the days that followed, Mark attempted contact. Apologies came mixed with conditions. Aisha declined them all. She had learned that peace does not require permission from those who once held power. The community supported her transition into a new life. The children adjusted slowly, healing in ways that took patience and time. There were nights of nightmares, days of questions, but now those questions were met with honesty and reassurance. Aisha often reflected on how close she had come to breaking, and how Allah had never let her fall. She remembered the verse that had carried her through the darkest hours. Indeed, Allah defends those who believe. Now she understood it, not as a promise of ease, but as a promise of justice. The world had tried to silence her. Power had tried to erase her. Fear had tried to bend her. But Allah had spoken. And when Allah speaks, no dhulm can stand. Only one chapter remained. The chapter of purpose, Babas. Uprise. The months that followed the court's decision were not easy, but they were honest. Aisha no longer measured her days by luxury or approval, but by intention. Her life had been stripped down to its essentials: faith, responsibility, patience, and love. And in that simplicity, she found strength she never knew she possessed. The children returned slowly to a sense of normalcy. Healing did not happen overnight. There were questions that surfaced at unexpected moments, memories that triggered fear, silences that spoke louder than words. Aisha never rushed them. Islam, she had learned, was not about forcing outcomes, but about nurturing growth with wisdom and mercy. She taught them that Allah is just, even when justice takes time. That oppression may appear powerful, but it is always temporary. That patience is not silence, it is trust in the right moment. Each night before sleep, they sat together and spoke openly. Sometimes they talked about their fears, sometimes about gratitude, sometimes about the future. And sometimes they simply sat in quiet prayer, hands raised, hearts steady. Aisha no longer hid who she was. She wore her faith with dignity, not defiance. She did not argue with those who misunderstood her. She had learned that character speaks louder than explanations. Neighbors who once avoided her began to notice the change. Not dramatic, not loud, but consistent. Calm replaced chaos, stability replaced fear. She began working with women who had experienced similar vulm. Those trapped in controlling homes, those silenced by power, those told that endurance meant surrender. Aisha did not offer them empty promises. She offered truth. Faith will not always save you from pain, she told them, but it will save you from losing yourself. Her story spread quietly, not as scandal, but as testimony. A testimony that Allah's help does not always arrive in the form we expect, but always arrives at the moment it is needed. One evening, as Aisha watched her children pray together, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the woman she once was, confused, afraid, searching for meaning in places that could never give it. She remembered the nights of fear, the moments of despair, the weight of injustice pressing down on her chest. And she remembered the verse that had changed everything. Allah is the protector of those who believe. He brings them out of darkness into light. She finally understood it fully. The darkness had not only been around her, it had been inside her. And Allah, through trial, through loss, through patience, had led her out. Her life would never return to what it once was, and she was grateful for that. Because what she had now was real. A faith chosen freely, children raised with conscience, a heart anchored in trust. On the anniversary of the day she regained custody, Aisha gathered her children and said something she wanted them to remember forever. Never think that truth is weak, she said. It only looks weak to those who fear it. And never think Allah is absent when you are tested. Sometimes the test is proof that He is close. The children listened, not as victims of a story, but as survivors of one. As the sun set outside their modest home, Aisha raised her hands in quiet prayer. Ya Allah, she whispered, you carried me when I could not stand. You protected my children when I could not reach them. Accept what little I have done and use my life for good. She lowered her hands with a peaceful heart. The world had once tried to break her. Oppression had tried to silence her. Fear had tried to claim her future. But Allah had written something else. And when Allah writes your story, no dhulm, no power, no loss can erase it. Her journey had begun in confusion. It passed through darkness and pain, but it ended, and truly began, in light.